Hello everyone. I am Prabhashini Wijewantha, Senior Lecturer attached to the Department of Human Resource Management, Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies, University of Kelaniya. You all know me as I have taken the subject International Management in your Year 3, Semester 2. Again, I welcome you all for the subject International Human Resource Management. So as you all know, this is a subject offered to you in the Year 4, Semester 1. And as this is a compulsory subject, all of you have to follow this subject. So this is the third session for this subject. I hope you attended the module introduction with Miss Jeevanti and the introduction to IHRM session with Miss Yasodhara. So this is the third session and the second topic of your course outline. In this topic, we discuss about how international organizations are created under the title Creating the International Organization. Why or what is the importance of including this topic in this subject? So we are studying International Human Resource Management. So now, as you have completed the first session on Introduction to IHRM, you all know what is International Human Resource Management. International Human Resource Management is all about the practice of human resource management in internationally operating organizations. So from the first year itself in your degree program, you have been studying human resource management. As you all are following a Bachelor of Business Management Human Resource Special Degree. So what is new in this subject International HRM? Or what is the difference between HRM that you had been studying up to now and this subject? So we discuss in this subject about the new things that we have to pay attention when you are practicing human resource management in an internationally operating organization. That is number 1. Then the number 2 is we discuss about the complexities, differences, difficulties and challenges that have to be faced by internationally operating organizations in practicing the human resource management function. So up to now, you may have thought that practice of human resource management is almost the same with every organization. But it is not the same. It is different. So when it comes to internationally operating organizations, there are additional problems, challenges and activities that need to be handled by an HR department. In addition, there are also a lot of complexities involved in the practice of HRM. So we are going to discuss about all these things in this subject, International Human Resource Management. So it is a very interesting subject for you to study. So then, what is the point of having this topic in your curriculum? Creating the international organization. So now I mentioned previously that the subject international human resource management is all about how organizations operate internationally in the international market and how the human resource management function becomes complex in such organizations. So then, what are these internationally operating organizations? How could a company become an internationally operating organization? That is what we are going to discuss in this lesson. So, doing this lesson is very easy for me with your batch. It is not like with other previous batches. Why? Because we have discussed about these international organizations or internationally operating business operations in the subject international management. Of course, this lesson is included in the IHRM course content because international management is an optional subject. And some of the students may do that subject or may not do that subject. So last year you all did the subject. The whole batch did the subject. But in some instances, the whole batch does not do the subject. So in that case, we have to also pay attention to the students who have not done the subject international management. So we are mindful of them as well, and that is why we have included this topic in the international HRM subject. Anyway, now do not think that the same content that you studied for international management would be repeated here. Definitely there is a difference because the depth and breadth involved in this lesson is much more than what you all learned in the third year second semester, because now we all are more mature students. So then here we look at how organizations become internationally operating organizations. So an organization becomes an international organization as it decides to enter into the international market. So that is how international organizations are created. So some organizations which had been doing business already in a particular local market later decides that they can also cater into the foreign markets, and therefore they decide to go for a global expansion. So when an organization decides to go for a global expansion, they have to enter into the international or global market. So what are the methods that they can use to enter into the global market or the international market? So that is what we discuss under entry strategy alternatives. What are the different entry strategies available for an organization to enter the international market? So there are different alternatives available. So different organizations may select different entry strategies. So this is a diagram that I have downloaded from the internet. So it clearly in a summarized form shows the global market entry strategies that can be followed by different organizations based on their preference. So let's discuss all these things in detail throughout this lesson. So what is this? What is this? What does this picture include? This picture shows leading brands in the world. Nestle, P&G, Johnson, Unilever's, Kellogg's, all that. And then it shows the different product brands that they offer into the international market. So then by looking at this, you would be able to easily understand how all these different brands are sent out to the market by different organizations. So if you look at this picture here, you would see Snickers and Mars, which are available in the Sri Lankan market. Or you would see Cadbury's chocolates. Or you would see Tide washing powder. Or you would see Vaseline. So all these products are available in Sri Lanka because all these organizations have decided to engage in international business by going international. So we have to look at how they have gone international. What are the advantages or disadvantages of going international? And what is the impact of the international entry strategy of these organizations on the practice of human resource management? So let's discuss. So before we discuss the content of this lesson, we will look at the learning outcomes. So you all know what are learning outcomes because you all have already followed the previous subject with me, that is international management. So you all know that as a practice at the beginning of each lesson, I discuss the learning outcomes. What are learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are the areas that we would expect to achieve, or like the outcomes that are expected to achieve from the students at the end of the lecture or lesson. So on completion of this session, you should be able to discuss the stages of internationalization or going global of business firms. So as you have studied with Miss Yasodhara in international management, international organizations are not created overnight. So international organizations are, for once, locally operating organizations. Most of the international organizations operate today had once been locally operating organizations, and gradually they have continued or expanded their operations internationally, and they have automatically become international organizations. So then that is what we call internationalization or going global or going international, or you call it going to the world. Organizations go internationally to the world. So then some organizations, there are different methods or entry strategies that companies can follow to go international. So then some companies follow stages. They go from one stage to another in the internationalization process. But some organizations straight away follow a particular middle-level internationalization approach. So anyway, we will discuss it on a stage-wise basis. Discuss the stages of internationalization or going global of business firms or business organizations. Next, after looking at the different stages of internationalization, or we call them internationalization strategy alternatives. So then you have to evaluate each type of internationalization strategy alternatives by comparing and contrasting them. You can compare them with each other and see what are the similarities between them and also the differences among them. And finally, identify the factors that influence a firm's choice of entry mode. So, the different organizations use different entry strategies or entry modes. So then what are the factors that we have to pay attention in identifying the factors that influence a firm's choice of entry mode? So we will discuss that as well. So let me begin with a brief introduction. A company considering entry into the international arena must take a more specific set of strategic alternatives or different ways to enter a foreign market. A company or an organization considering or thinking to enter into the international arena or enter into the international market or enter into the global market must take a more specific set of strategic alternatives. They must take a specific strategic decision to enter a foreign market. So first thing, they have to decide whether they are going to go international or not. Secondly, they have to decide what are the key decisions related to that entry. The managers need to consider how potential new markets may best be served by their company in light of the risks and the critical environmental factors associated with their entry strategies. So managers of the organizations need to consider or think how potential new markets may be best served. So once a company decides to go international, they have to decide which markets they are going to enter into, because you can't enter into all the markets around the world. So after doing a market study, the companies may decide which markets should be best to enter. So that depends on, like, after deciding which markets to enter or after identifying the potential new markets, the company has to calculate the risks, how potential new markets may best be served by their company in light of the risks. So one of the main factors that we have to pay attention to in arriving at an international market are the risks. So after taking the risks into consideration, we can decide the strategy to enter into the international market. So based on the amount of risk involved in a particular market, one company may decide to go to that market following the exporting strategy. While taking the risk in another market into consideration, the same company may go to that market by opening up a sales subsidiary. So all these things depend on the amount of risk involved in that foreign market. In addition to the amount of risks, the next thing that we need to pay our attention is about critical environmental factors associated with these entry strategies. So as we know, there are different entry strategies. And then you have to evaluate the environment of the potential new market. So that is what we did under environmental analysis or studying the international environment. So then after taking the critical or very important environmental factors into consideration, the company may decide what are the entry strategies associated with this particular environmental issues. Taking these environmental conditions like terrorism risk, things like nationalization risks, all that, what is the best strategy to enter into, let's say, the Venezuelan market. The strategy followed by a company to enter the Venezuelan market would be different from the strategy followed by the company to enter into the French market. And the strategy followed by the company to enter into the French market would be different from the strategy followed by them to enter into the Middle East market. So these alternatives are not mutually exclusive. Several may be employed at the same time. So that is what I explained to you before as well. There are different entry strategy alternatives. So one company can select many. These are not mutually exclusive. You know about the meaning of the word mutually exclusive more than me because you all have studied statistics. So then there are two different alternatives. There is no problem. For one market, we can enter with one strategy, whereas for another market, we can enter using another strategy. So these alternatives are not mutually exclusive. One single company may employ several entry strategy alternatives at the same particular time to enter into different markets. So then, what are the strategies available? So let's look at how organizations go global. So this diagram in simple shows the strategies available for an organization to select: global sourcing, exporting and importing, licensing, franchising, strategic alliance, joint venture, foreign subsidiary. Next, what is this? Minimal global investment, significant global investment. So this diagram shows the amount of investment required in selecting the entry strategy. So if a company decides to follow something like global sourcing, the amount of financial and other resource investment is very minimal or very small. Whereas if you follow this kind of an entry strategy, like a strategic alliance, joint venture, or a foreign subsidiary, the investment would be very high and significant. So like that, the amount of investment increases along this from left to right. So we are going to discuss about each of these strategies. Let's discuss. So first thing we are going to study is global sourcing, as we saw in the previous slide. So as indicated in the previous slide, global sourcing is an entry strategy alternative that requires a minimum financial or resource or capital investment. So along with global sourcing, I'm also going to jointly discuss about service sector outsourcing as well. How companies outsource certain services. Outsource white-collar or low-end jobs to developing nations with cheap labor to reduce overall costs. So you all know already what is outsourcing. Nowadays, most of the companies around the world have decided to outsource. What do you mean by outsourcing? Outsourcing means a company hands over a part of its operation to another company. So outsource white collar or low-end jobs to developing nations. So as it indicates, mostly global sourcing is practiced or adopted by large companies in the western part of the world, especially developed nations. So then the developed nations have lot of large organizations. But most of their operations do not happen in those western or developed countries. Most of their operations take place in developing countries because they have outsourced most of their operations or jobs. So we had heard about this for quite a long time. We were familiar with this because most of the organizations used to outsource lot of low-end jobs or low-level jobs in the organizational hierarchy, or let's say non-value-adding jobs or the jobs of blue-collar workers to developing nations. What these companies did is they identified what are the low-end or non-value-adding jobs or activities. And then they divided them, they identified them and decided whether they can be automated or not. After deciding whether it is possible to automate, they automated them. The ones which cannot be automated, they transferred or shifted into developing nations like Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, Vietnam, Maldives, and other countries certain countries in Africa. Why? Because these companies possess cheap labor. They have labor or they have human resource at a cheaper price or at a lower price. So then by transferring these jobs to developing nations, these large organizations in the western parts of the world were able to reduce their labor cost to a large extent. Because the employees or workers in those countries demand a very high salary. One thing, because there is only a small amount of supply of labor in the western countries because their population is low. and they do not have skilled workers. Number 2. And the third one is, as the cost of living in those countries is very high, you have to pay them a high amount of money. But if they transfer such operations to developing countries, it's not that difficult. Because countries like Sri Lanka, China, India have very large populations, huge populations. So then there are a lot of people looking for jobs. So there is a huge supply of labor. Because there is a huge supply or a surplus supply of labor, the people have a lesser bargaining power. And also at the same time they have a high, they are skilled. The people in the developing nations are skilled. So as a result, it is possible to obtain cheap labor at a reduced or lowered cost. So therefore, most of the companies in international markets try to reduce their overall costs by transferring their low-end jobs to developing nations. When entering overseas markets, these organizations use different strategies. So when a company has adopted global sourcing, they enter the overseas markets by setting up local offices, research laboratories, or call centers, depending on whether they have outsourced white-collar jobs or low-end jobs. So the countries that they often use for global sourcing are India, which is a highly populated country, the Philippines, China, again the world's largest population, and countries like South Africa. So when they enter these countries or these overseas markets, as they have outsourced white-collar jobs, they have to set up local offices, research laboratories, or call centers. So most of these local offices are for the purpose of legal handling. So most of the legal operations of Western companies in developed nations have now been transferred to legal officers in India. So the handling of legal matters are done by the legal officers in India. And then also research laboratories. So most of the research experiments of large companies happen in research laboratories located in developing nations. And we all know that most of the banks like HSBC have established their call centers in countries like India. So in addition, we also observe leading software companies like Accenture or Oracle have started software design operations in developing countries because they have got qualified software engineers available for a low cost at developing countries. And other customer support operations, accounting activities, etc. happen in call centers in developing countries for companies like General Electrics and IBM as well. So the main focus of using global sourcing is targeting highly skilled but lower wage human capital for high-end jobs. So this is identified as transformational outsourcing. So as I mentioned previously, most of these companies from the western parts of the world, that is developing nations, target nowadays about outsourcing highly skilled jobs. Earlier we thought that the companies would only outsource low skilled jobs or low end jobs. But now we can observe that most of the highly skilled or white collar jobs are being outsourced. Why? Because you can now find highly skilled labor for a lower wage in developing nations. Target highly skilled but lower wage human capital. So a software designing job done by a software designer in USA for, let's say, $500 per day is done by a software developer in India for, let's say, $200 per day, something like that. So that is why most of the companies in the western part of the world target highly skilled but lower wage human capital for high-end jobs. So this is a different type of outsourcing, and this outsourcing of white-collar jobs is identified as transformational outsourcing. I hope you all can remember this matter. This matter related to global sourcing was discussed by me with you in your third year when I was teaching you international management under the topic globalization. I didn't discuss it as an international entry strategy, but instead I discussed it as a consequence of globalization, where I mentioned that recently IBM reduced a lot of jobs in USA in the Silicon Valley, and many of the people in the Silicon Valley were laid off, while many new jobs were created in India for IBM. So that is because of their global sourcing strategy. And also I shared with you the example that earlier the parents fed their kids, saying that parents in the Western world fed their kids saying that if you don't eat this food will be thrown away, and it will be eaten by poor black kids. But nowadays parents in the American part of or Western part of the world scare their children, saying that if you don't study hard, your jobs will be taken away by the people from the developing nations. So that is, in one hand, is something that we can be proud of as well. Still we are in the discussion about global sourcing. So when they do or practice global sourcing, it offers global round-the-clock service from different time zones. So the companies can operate 24 hours of the day because they operate globally. So the company can offer global services to different parts of the world at different points in time. So basically the company is operating or functioning around the clock by providing a service around the clock in different time zones. Like IBM in India, now that is why IBM has come to India and Sri Lanka, General Electric has come to India and China, and Accenture has come to Philippines, and even Oracle has gone to India. So basically there would be a lot of negative long-term consequences of this strategy, but most of the companies we could observe that is targeting an immediate cost saving. So nowadays India is by far the leader in all fields of offshore services, in large part due to its highly educated and English language staff availability. So the company that has received most benefits out of this global sourcing approach is India. India is up to now the leader in all the fields of offshore services. What are offshore services? Services taken by a company or a country from the other countries which are beyond their shore. Offshore services. In large part, this is due to its highly educated and English language staff availability. Now we see there are a lot of Indian people who are highly educated and also they are competent in the English language. So when they are highly educated and competent in English language, it is easy for the Western companies to recruit them, and there is a huge population, so there is higher supply of labor. Therefore, the price of labor is low compared to the West. The next international entry strategy followed by organizations is exporting and importing. Exporting, as we all know, is sending the products produced in a particular country to another country. Whereas importing is bringing in products produced in one country to another country. So you may have recently heard that Sri Lanka is largely importing a lot of products from other countries. So which means that Sri Lanka is far, far away from a self-sufficient economy. So as a result, now with this global economic crisis faced by all the countries around the world, you may have seen that Sri Lanka has also now decided to largely reduce its imports. And also they are trying to increase their exports so that they can recover the economy of the country. So exporting is exporting products for sale in overseas locations or foreign countries, like Sri Lanka is exporting tea to countries like Iran, Japan, etc. and importing products from overseas to sell in the home country, like importing cosmetics products and pharmaceutical products from countries like India, China, Australia to sell them in the home country. So this is in terms of international trade or international business, a relatively low risk way to begin with and test out an international market. So this is a relatively very low risk way or a very low risk method to begin with. So most of the companies that have become very successful in international operations today have initially started their operations by simply exporting their products to another country, because then there is only a very small investment involved, and as a result there is only a very low risk. So even if the business fails, there would be only a very small problem, and test out an international market. So then in the initial stages of a business, we exactly don't know whether the foreign customers in the foreign market would like our product or whether they would embrace our product. So in that case, we have to first send a small quantity of our product to the international market and test out whether our product is embraced by the customers of the foreign market. So therefore, we can use exporting and importing initially as a low risk way to enter into a foreign market, and if the popularity or the demand of our products in the foreign market is high, then we can decide other methods or select other methods of entering the foreign market. So as I mentioned before, there is only a low risk because there is only a small investment involved, little investment involved. The company 3M uses exports to establish an initial presence in a foreign market. So we all know the company 3M. They are a very large business. But still, they use the exporting strategy to establish an initial presence or to establish the start of presence in a foreign market. Only building foreign production facilities. Once sales volume rises to a level that justifies local production. So do you think 3M is exporting all their products from the headquarters to other countries? No. So it is their initial strategy. They export products to a foreign market and evaluate the demand coming from the customers of the foreign market. So they establish their initial presence through exporting, and later on, as the demand from the foreign market increases, they decide to build or construct a production facility or a factory in the foreign market. So that decision is made once the sales volume rises to a particular level that justifies local production or production in the foreign market. So the good part of exporting and importing strategies is that it is fast. So you can establish your international operation very fast. It doesn't take quite a long time because the legal, political and other restrictions are relatively less. And because it's fast, let's say if a company feels that their export business operation is not successful, then they can easily withdraw, or they can easily decide to stop exporting products to that country. By the decision to withdraw, the company might not be losing a huge amount of money, unlike if they have invested in a production or a sales facility in the foreign country. So because of its advantages, exporting and importing is mostly used by small to medium-sized companies. Exporting and importing strategy is mostly used or adopted by small to medium-sized companies. For an example, Jordan toothbrush. So this Jordan toothbrush is a small company based in Norway, and they have only one plant in Norway. And they have a really good distributor network, and they have distributed this Jordan toothbrush across different parts of the world through a good exporting strategy and a distributor network. So when you follow the exporting strategy, from your home country you export the product either through a cargo plane or a cargo ship. And then there is an agent of yours in the host country or the foreign country. So he is a person from the host country itself, and he would distribute the products among the vendors in the host country. So this distributor network is mainly handled by the agent in the foreign market and not by the parent company. And when the companies engage largely in export and import trade, they may have to open a separate department in the company called an exports department to handle the foreign sales. And employ a separate exports manager, like companies like CBL Manchi or Dilma or Harish Chandra or Siddhalepa is doing. Or sometimes if you do not wish to open up a separate department like HR marketing, if you do not wish to open up a separate department as an exports department, then what you have to do is you have to get the services of an export management company. You have to use an export management company. Next, we move on to the next strategy, sales subsidiaries. What are sales subsidiaries? This is a strategy where a company in a particular country, let's say Damro in Sri Lanka. So we all know Damro is a Sri Lankan company. So they open up a subsidiary in a foreign country. But the speciality of this subsidiary is it's a sales subsidiary. They don't do large scale operations in the foreign country. This subsidiary is only for the purpose of selling the products in the foreign country. They don't have a big operation in that country. So in this scenario, the company in Sri Lanka, that is Damro in Sri Lanka, manufactures all their furniture and electrical equipment in Sri Lanka itself. And then they export those products to the foreign branch. So let's say to the branch in Cochin, India. So that branch is identified as a sales subsidiary. And they are the group responsible for selling it in India, whole India or Cochin, India. So then in this case, the company does not appoint an agent in the foreign country because they themselves have started an operation, a sales operation in the foreign country. So then this sales subsidiary will decide whether they are having their own distributor network or whether they are going to outsource the distribution process. Committing to directly sell home country products in overseas markets. So once you open up a sales subsidiary, it is a commitment to directly sell home country products from, let's say, Damro, Sri Lanka in the overseas market. That is that is in India. So here they do not use the services of an agent because the company itself, that is Damro itself, has opened their own sales outlet or branch with local staff. So Damro itself has opened their own sales outlet or their branch. In the case of Commercial Bank or Bank of Ceylon, they have opened up their own branches. But these own branches with people from Sri Lanka have local staff, that is staff from India, Australia, like that. So the second strategy adopted by 3M is opening up sales subsidiaries. So that's what I said, the same company can use different strategies during the different stages of internationalization and also during different stages of their depending on the different markets that they cater to. So that is how Damro has gone and opened up a sales subsidiary in Cochin, India. And that is how Commercial Bank has opened up their branches in Bangladesh and Maldives. And how BOC, Bank of Ceylon, has opened up operations in Seychelles. And that is how the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, that is 3M, has entered certain foreign markets. Next is subcontracting. or contract manufacturing. So this is like the manufacturing or product aspect of global sourcing. In global sourcing, we focus on outsourcing service providing type operations to foreign countries. But in subcontracting, we talk about manufacturing products, outsourcing the product manufacturing operations to other countries. So certain companies which are based in western parts of the world or in developed nations give certain components of their production process to subcontractors or contract manufacturing. So then let's say Nike. So Nike in America may give a contract to a manufacturer in, let's say, China to produce the shoes for them and send them to USA for sales. In that case, so the contract manufacturing process takes place in China. And then this Chinese manufacturer also does not do everything in his operation. Maybe he would again subcontract a part of its production operation to another person. Contracting for production of finished goods or component parts overseas. So this contracting or giving a contract for production can happen for finished goods. So in that case, a company in America may give the contract to produce the complete finished good to a, let's say, company in Sri Lanka. That is what was done by these lingerie manufacturers like Victoria's Secret, Tommy Hilfiger, all that. So then they outsourced their production of complete finished goods of lingerie to companies like Brandix and MAS, or component parts of the production process to overseas locations, like how Boeing 777 is manufactured. So different component parts are manufactured at different parts of the world and they are assembled together at the Boeing company to come up with the product. And then it is sold in the home country. Then the product is sold in the home country, let's say America. Or Victoria's Secret's products are sold in Europe and America. So in that case, their products can be sold at a cheaper price in America because their manufacturing costs are low compared to their competitors who are manufacturing in the same location itself. So therefore, they can win the competition over the others. So this is how IKEA company is manufacturing furniture as well. So goods or components are imported and sold in the home country or other countries. Goods or components are imported and sold in the home country or in other countries. Let's say Victoria's Secrets in America would import the finished good, the garments, to their country and then sell in other Western countries as well. So again, this is a method of quickly entering to use cheap labor overseas. Mostly these companies enter into foreign countries very quickly using this method. This is a very easy entering method. Why they use this is because they know that again cheap labor is available in countries like Sri Lanka, South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, China, Vietnam, all that. So when you are doing subcontracting, they need to ensure reliability and quality of the local contractor. So when a company is subcontracting, they need to ensure or make sure that their products coming from another country are of high quality and they are reliable. Because if the local contractor or the subcontractor has produced the products with a low quality, that would not only damage the reputation of the subcontractor but largely damages the reliability and the popularity and the brand image of the large company, because like companies like Puma, Adidas, Nike, all of them produce their products using this method. And another advantage of this method is that they involve only a low capital investment. No problems of local ownership. There are no problems of local ownership that would occur if a company adopts this method, because they just have to subcontract, no ownership. So like salaries, wages, CPF, ETF, factory maintenance cost, lot of them are saved. Companies like Nike, Honda, Victoria's Secrets, all are using this approach. But then again, these companies, including IKEA Furniture, have faced problems because of following this approach, because there had been instances where the reliability and quality of the products had been downgraded in certain instances by the subcontractors or the local contract manufacturers. And also there is a huge negative brand image built up towards Nike, saying that they are using child labor in countries like China and Bangladesh, and it according to their principles was identified as slavery. Next strategy is offshoring. What is offshoring? What is the difference between offshoring and contract manufacturing? One of the possible questions at the exam from this topic could be differentiate between global sourcing, subcontracting and offshoring. So what is offshoring? Offshoring refers to when a company moves one or all of its own factories, full or partial production process from home country to another country. So in this case, the difference is the company. Let's say the Toyota company. The Toyota company in Japan moves one of its factories to USA. So this is done by Toyota Japan itself. They are not subcontracting or they are not getting the services of any US people. They are just starting up a manufacturing plant shifting a manufacturing plant to US. So that is the company moves one or all of its factories, full or partial production process. One or all of its factories or the complete or the partial production process from the home country, that is from Japan to another country. So some of Toyota's and Nissan's factories have moved into the US following this strategy. So then the products, that is like the cars or the vehicles sold by Toyota for the US market is manufactured in their US operations, whereas the products sold to other countries like Sri Lanka or other parts are produced in Japan. The same approach is also used by a shoe company in Italy called BAG. So what are the advantages of offshoring? It provides the company with access to foreign markets while avoiding trade barriers. So let's say Toyota company in Japan wanted to sell their vehicles in a foreign market, let's say in the American market. But they could not do it earlier. Why? Because there were trade barriers. There were different types of trade barriers like laws, rules, regulations, taxes, political influences, etc. So these trade barriers were creating either they were preventing or incurring a high cost to enter into the foreign market, let's say US. So then what Toyota did is they moved one of their factories to USA. So then they have a factory in USA and then they produce their products there. So through that through this offshoring approach, they were able to access the US market, which is a foreign market. And also as they are producing products for US, in the US market itself or in USA itself, it incurs only a low cost of production and sales. Why? Because there is no export-import trade tax or anything. The next strategy that we are going to discuss is licensing and franchising. Though any of you may not know what is licensing and franchising, you know about a lot of organizations that engage in franchising. And you all often visit those organizations too. What are they? McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Burger King, KFC, Domino's Pizza. All these organizations operate in the international market using the licensing and franchising method. So these organizations operate in the foreign market using the licensing and franchising method. So what is licensing and what is franchising? Some people, some authors or some scholars differentiate between licensing and franchising. But there are some others who do not differentiate between the two. So anyway, since this is just the international HRM subject and the HRM degree and not an IB course or an international business degree, so we would not go in detail about the difference of licensing and franchising. Licensing and franchising manufacturing and services to foreign firms. So under licensing, what happens is a company in a foreign country, let's say a beer company, Budweiser beer company in a foreign country hands over the license to a company in another country. Let's assume, this is not real, let's assume to Lion Beer in Sri Lanka to manufacture Budweiser beer. So then Lion Beer would be manufacturing and selling Budweiser beer in Sri Lanka based on the license received by them from the Budweiser beer company. Similarly, franchising is also the same. A company may give a franchise, company may give the franchising authority to provide their services to a foreign firm. Let's take McDonald's. So McDonald's in USA has franchised or given the franchising power to Abans in Sri Lanka to provide the services of McDonald's in Sri Lanka. Similarly, the Burger King in USA has handed over their franchising authority to SoftLogic in Sri Lanka. The same with KFC and Cargill's. So then this Cargill, SoftLogic and Avance, they are the foreign firm. So they are using the brand name. Brand name of whom? Burger King, McDonald's or KFC. So Avance is not selling McDonald's products under the Avance brand name. They are selling the products under the McDonald's brand name itself. And in all their products, bags, or the name boards, everything, they use the original McDonald's trademark, original KFC trademark, original Burger King trademark. So we go there because we see this original Burger King trademark. And also the most of the production technology used in Sri Lanka and USA is the same. So then the SoftLogic, when they were starting Burger King operations, they imported the machines from US according to the US standards. And then the products that they sell and the service quality they provide is almost the same or similar to the US service, but they do some customization to cater to the Sri Lankan culture and the market. So then the product comes with the same format. So this happens after entering into a licensing or franchising agreement with the companies in the two countries. International licensing agreements grant or give the rights or the authority to a firm or an organization in the host country, let's say SoftLogic, to either produce or sell a product or both for a specified period for an ongoing royalty fee paid by the licensee. So this licensing or franchising happens for a specified period. After that period, they have to again renew the licensing or franchising agreement for an ongoing or continuing royalty fee. So because McDonald's have given their brand name, their trademark, their technology, their products and specifications, the authority to sell their products in Sri Lanka, and they have shared their recipes. So because of all that, Avance is earning money. So McDonald's would do it just for no money? No. So the income that McDonald's is receiving from this is that McDonald's receives a royalty fee. So this royalty fee is paid by the licensee. So who is the licensee? In this scenario, Avance, SoftLogic and Cargill's are the licensees for the specified period. So they are paying the royalty fee to McDonald's, KFC or Burger King in US. So the other examples for licensing and franchising, as I mentioned earlier, are Anheuser-Busch. So Anheuser-Busch has granted the license to produce and market Budweiser beer in countries like England, Japan, Australia and Israel to their local companies. And then in the fast food industry, this approach is very common. Like we discussed, Burger King, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, KFC and even the Holiday Inn hotel chain operates in that manner. So what are the advantages of this approach? This is a relatively or comparatively low risk strategy. So if McDonald's or Pizza Hut or KFC were to enter into the Sri Lankan market by themselves, it requires a huge investment in terms of money, technology and other resources, and also they have to recruit people and train them, and also they have to study the culture, all that. So that would be very difficult. So therefore it's easy for them to follow the licensing or franchising approach, as there is only a relatively low risk involved in this strategy, and also there is only a little investment required. And this method is also useful in countries where entry by other means is restricted. There are certain countries like China, Venezuela, or Mexico, or Cuba, where those companies do not easily allow, they do not have a very liberal economy. So in these countries have not allowed the other companies from foreign countries to enter their market through other strategies like wholly owned subsidiaries or offshoring, etc. So in that case, in such countries, it's useful to enter those markets by using this licensing and franchising approach. When you use this approach, KFC is entering Sri Lanka not directly by themselves, but by partnering with Cargill, something like that. So next we are going to look at the turnkey operations or projects. So this is also a method that the organizations use to go international. Have you all heard of turnkey projects or operations before? In addition to studying about these in your third year, second semester for international management, I'm sure that you all have heard about this for your A-levels business studies subject also. Where you have studied about boot and bought, build, operate, own, transfer, build, operate, transfer, all that. So all these belong to turnkey operations or projects. So a turnkey operation is where a company, let's say a company like the China Harbour, so a company designs and constructs a facility. So a company, mostly this is done by Chinese companies. So a company designs or plans and constructs or builds a facility. So this facility is an infrastructure facility, like a bridge, like an express highway, like the Southern Express Highway, or this new bridge constructed over the Kalani River, or let's say a harbour like the Mattala, this Hambantota Harbour, or the Mattala Airport, or a jetty in a harbour. So it is this kind of a facility. This company constructs this in a foreign country, abroad. Mostly this happens in a developing country. So since developing countries do not have sufficient facilities, capital and expertise, knowledge, they assign that task to this kind of companies. Then the company designs and constructs the facility abroad. So it could also be a dam like the Victoria Dam or a chemical plant. And then after constructing it, they manage it or they operate it. And while operating them, so build, operate. While operating it, they also train the local personnel. So then they train the local staff, the local human resources how to run the operation or how to manage the operation and how to repair it once it's damaged or how to maintain it, and then hand over the operation to the local management. And at the time of handing over, the country has to make a payment to that company. So that is, the examples are companies like China Harbour, which has done a lot of constructions in Sri Lanka, and one such project is the Southern Express Highway project. So then for these kind of things, the foreign company needs supplies, raw materials or resources from the foreign location. And then for that they need, usually they do not bring it from overseas, they take it from the country itself. So they have to have a good set of local suppliers who can supply quality raw material for this infrastructure project. And also they need labor, they need human resources. Human resources in the sense, here they look for blue collar workers or rather laborers. And then sometimes now when it comes to certain projects in Sri Lanka, Chinese companies bring their own Chinese laborers as well. And then reliable infrastructure like electricity, water and telecommunication facilities, and acceptable means of repatriating profits. So upon the construction of the infrastructure facility, the income generated out of it during the initial period will be repatriated back to the home country of the company. Let's say in our case China. So the Sri Lankan government, if for an example, has to grant sufficient permission to repatriate profits to the foreign company or foreign country, because otherwise they will have to spend all their profits in Sri Lanka itself. But China can gain only if the company can repatriate their profits to the foreign country, that is their country, China. So therefore the Sri Lankan government should grant them permission for that. So that is about turnkey operations or turnkey projects. Next international entry strategy that we have to discuss is strategic alliances. These are also referred to as cooperative strategies. So what are strategic alliances? So these are identified in the corporate world as corporate marriages. These are strategies or methods where two companies discuss with each other and decide a particular strategy and then follow up on that strategy. So that means basically there is a joining of two organizations. So strategic alliances occur as a result of partnership agreements between two or more firms. So two or more firms or two or more business organizations enter into a partnership agreement where they decide they can better pursue their mutual goals. So then this agreement is arrived at with the objective that both companies will, after the alliance, be able to better pursue their mutual goals, their joint goals, and thereby produce a product or a service. So after entering into the partnership agreement, they may decide to produce a particular product, like the Daimler Chrysler car or the Renault Nissan vehicle, or it could even be a service by combining their resources. So this service often applies to the airline industry. Often it is between the airline industry. So to produce this product or service, both companies are benefiting by combining their resources, financial, managerial expertise and technological. So they combine their financial resources, managerial expertise and other technological facilities, as well as their existing distinctive competitive advantages. So the competitive advantages possessed by one company in the alliance will also be shared with the other company. Or rather, the other company in the partnership agreement will also get benefited by the competitive advantages experienced by the other company. So there are three types of strategic alliances as identified by international business and management scholars. The first category is international joint ventures. The next category is equity strategic alliances. And the third category is non-equity strategic alliances. So what are international joint ventures? The first category is international joint ventures. So an international joint venture is one form of strategic alliance where one company located in a particular country enters into an alliance or an agreement and start up a venture with another company in another country. So let's assume a Japanese company wants to enter into the Italian market. So in that case, what they would do is they would enter the Italian market, which is the host country, by entering into an international joint venture with an Italian company. So it is an international joint venture with a host country firm or a company. So what are the features of this? There is a huge high investment and risk. So when you enter into this kind of agreement and enter the Italian market, there is a relatively high investment involved in that. And also, as there is a high investment, there is a high risk as well. But at the same time, this kind of an international joint venture will present opportunities for both companies, the Japanese company as well as the Italian company. So these opportunities would be opportunities that are unattainable through other international entry strategies. So then in that case, that is the advantage of entering into the joint venture agreement. Sometimes maybe Italy may allow the Japanese company to enter without any tax barriers, or there would not be any terrorism risk, or there would not be any political risk. So like that, there would be advantages. And also, the ownership of this new joint venture is shared by an MNC and a local partner through agreed proportions of equity. So when they start an international joint venture, say the Japanese company and the Italian company joins together and starts a separate joint venture. then this ownership of this separate joint venture is shared by an MNC. So MNC means the Japanese company, right? And so the Japanese company and the local partner, that is the Italian company. So then both these companies will be investing some amount of money. It would not be equal. Sometimes the Japanese company would invest more, whereas sometimes the Italian company would invest more. That we don't know. That depends on the companies. So then based on the amount of proportion, the proportion that the companies have agreed to invest in the business, they would possess the ownership of the company. We are continuing our discussion about strategic alliances, and in that we are still discussing about international joint ventures with host country firms. So then this kind of joint ventures enables multinational corporations, or rather large companies like Nissan, to rapidly enter to new markets. So we all know that this is how Nissan entered into the Italian market through Renault. And also this method helps to overcome trade barriers to achieve economies of scale, to secure access to additional raw materials, to acquire managerial and technological skills. So I have mentioned about this previously as well. So international joint ventures helps organizations to overcome trade barriers such as rules and regulations preventing export and import trade, and also tax regulations. So rather than just exporting their products from, let's say, Japan to Italy or Japan to Europe, they can now produce their products in Europe itself. So it helps to overcome trade barriers and also to achieve economies of scale. So as they are producing products in that particular region or continent, they can sell the products at a lower price compared to exporting from another country. And also it enables to secure access to additional raw materials from the host country and to acquire the managerial and technological skills of host country employees. Why? Because when you start a new venture like the joint venture like the Renault, Nissan or Daimler Chrysler, after that you employ people from the host country itself in managerial capacity jobs. And also it reduces the risk of expropriation and harassment by the host country. So you all studied about expropriation in the discussion on international business environment, where we discussed this under political risk. So this risk of expropriation is minimized in the new strategy of international joint ventures, as the ownership of the business in the host country is shared by both the foreign company as well as the host country organization. So, and at the same time, even though there would be any political disagreement between the two countries, there would be no harassment by the host country and its government for this particular organization, because this is not a individual organization created by a foreign firm. It's a joint venture with a local firm as well. So for an example, Mittal Steel India and Arcelor of France has created the world's biggest steel company in this form of an international joint venture. So then we move on to the next category of joint ventures or strategic alliances. Better we can call it the next category of strategic alliances. So one category of strategic alliances is international joint ventures, and the other category that we are discussing now is equity strategic alliances. So what are equity strategic alliances? An equity strategic alliance is where two or more partners or two or more organizations have different relative ownership shares in a new venture. So again, this is also a kind of a joint venture where two or more companies get together or join as partners and do a business. So these partners have different relative ownership shares. So let's say the American owner may have a higher share, whereas the European owner may have a lower share, and maybe the Japanese owner may have a moderate share. So like that. So two or more partners have relatively different ownership shares. The equity percentage of the new venture is different from company to company. So that is how Toyota has entered into different strategic alliances with its suppliers, sub-assemblers and distributors. So in the Toyota company itself, there are different suppliers, sub-assemblers and distributors. So Toyota has formed joint strategic alliances with these parties where Toyota has a high stake or high equity, whereas these companies have a relatively lesser equity. And in the same way, TCL Mobile and Thomson Electronics, so these companies have also followed the same strategy. The third category of strategic alliances is non-strategic alliances. So then what are non-strategic alliances? Agreements are carried through contract than ownership sharing. So in non-strategic alliances, there is no ownership of a new business. It's just an agreement. So in non-strategic alliances, it's different from international joint ventures and equity strategic alliances where the two companies form a separate organization. Here there is no separate organization, but there is some agreement between the two companies or two organizations to provide some facilities to each other. So based on an agreement between two companies, they carry through contract then ownership sharing. So two companies enter into a contract agreement where one company would provide support services to another company's business. So many airlines have this kind of partnerships. You may have heard about this very well. When you get into a flight, they would say, we are a member of the Sky Alliance or Sky Team. Now Sri Lankan Airlines is a member of One World. So like that, many airline partnerships have this kind of non-strategic alliances where they get into partnerships which we call as courtyard partnerships. And also Universal Parcel Services, which is a leading courier company in USA, is a global supply chain manager for many companies around the world where they have entered into non-strategic alliances with those companies. So there are three forms of non-strategic alliances in the airline industry: Sky Alliance, Sky Team, One World. These three are the leading airline partnerships. So with that, we finish our discussion about strategic alliances, and then we move on to discuss about foreign subsidiaries. So we all know foreign subsidiaries. We also call them fully or wholly owned subsidiaries. What is a fully or wholly owned subsidiary? It is where a company, let's say for an example, Unilever, which is a UK based company, has their own production and sales facility in Sri Lanka. So Unilever Sri Lanka is a fully or a wholly owned subsidiary of Unilever UK. So in this case, the foreign company, let's say Nestle or whatever, directly invests in a foreign country. So Unilever has directly invested in Sri Lanka by setting up a separate and independent production facility or office. So they directly invest in the foreign country by setting up a separate and independent production facility. So Unilever has their production facility part in Grand Pass and part in Corona, and they have their office in Grand Pass. So this whole thing is fully owned by Unilever UK. And then these multinational corporations, say Unilever or Nestle or whatever, has the total control of the operations of this foreign subsidiary. So there is no involvement of any other Sri Lankan organization in controlling the operations of Nestle Sri Lanka or Unilever Sri Lanka. They are totally managed by Unilever UK and Nestle Switzerland. Start from scratch or acquire an existing firm. So sometimes companies directly invest in starting a business. Start from scratch. So what they do is, let's assume, say Unilever wants to start a business in Sri Lanka. So they start a business in Sri Lanka from scratch by buying a land or renting out a land and building a factory and fixing plants and machinery and recruiting staff. Or they can do it by acquiring an existing firm in the host country. That is how P&G acquired Gillette. Or maybe let's say Insi Cement or Holcim acquired Sri Lanka's Sangstha Cement. Something like that. So Sri Lankan Cement Corporation had constructed the Sangstha Cement. What Holcim did was acquiring that existing firm, Sangstha Cement, and Holcim started doing business in Sri Lanka. And thereafter, Insi bought Holcim. So the Sri Lankan company was again owned by, the ownership of the Sri Lankan company, Holcim, also moved to Insi. Greater risks stem from larger capital investments. So whether they start from scratch or whether they acquire an existing firm, it requires a huge investment. Right? Because they acquire an existing firm means they have to pay a huge amount. Or even if they start from scratch, they have to pay a huge amount of money for that. So that is a very large capital investment. But let's assume if there is some form of terrorism risk or political risk in Sri Lanka, as we discussed under the topic international business environment in the international management subject, there is a huge risk or a greater risk stemming from this kind of capital investments. So the companies which possess this or own this kind of foreign subsidiaries, the examples are Nestle, Holcim, Unilever, Fonterra, Japanese Honda, Nissan and Toyota in US. So if you are running a fully owned subsidiary, it is important that you go and start this in a politically stable country. Because political instability in the host location can be very devastating or disappointing. Because now, can you remember the problem which Fonterra had? So there was a situation where Fonterra even had the risk of closing their operations in Sri Lanka and leaving. So that is because of certain terrorism and political risks. So this political instability in the host location is a serious issue or a very devastating or a disappointing issue if you start a foreign subsidiary. So these things has to be taken into consideration. So with that, we conclude our discussion on creating the international organization, or rather about global market entry strategies. I also kindly request you, while you are studying this lesson, you need to refer to the handout given on the subject International Management, International Business Environment, because that knowledge will be very important for you in understanding the content discussed in this topic. So in summary, we discussed the following. International entry and ownership strategies include exporting, licensing, franchising, contract manufacturing, offshoring, outsourcing, turnkey operations, management contracts, joint ventures and strategic alliances, and finally fully owned subsidiaries. So with that, we conclude our discussion on creating the international organization. If you have any questions or clarifications required, you can either email me or post them to the LMS, and then we can discuss them together through a forum. So, thank you very much for listening to this session. And also, I again remind you to attempt the quizzes uploaded in line with this lesson. So, thank you once again.